everyone, and welcome back to the Black Lawyers Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of interviewing CNN's Ariva Martin. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Thank you for joining us. You were a part of our season three. You're joining us again for season five. So it's been about two seasons. Of course, a lot has happened in the last two seasons, especially at the end of last year. You are the go-to person, I feel like, now on social media for Trump fact checking. And so we're happy to have you join us in a special Hot Topics to just kind of go over all the various things that have literally happened in less than a month of him taking office. We'll start with some hot topics and then we'll join into some more individual questions about you as a Black attorney, author, advocate, mom, all those good things. So starting with DEI, Trump, when he took office, he did what they call executive orders to essentially go down a checklist of things I guess he was planning on doing day one in office. And one of those things was DEI. A lot of people are not educated on DEI. I think people think DEI equals Black. DEI is actually women, handicap, um, and you know, at the end of the day, it's also other minorities. It's LGBTQ. I mean, it's so much. It's not just Black people, but when you hear DEI, that's what people think. And so anyway, I wanted to just start off with DEI because I know that was one of the first executive orders that he did.
Yeah, we saw the dismantling of many DEI programs begin even before Trump took office. So many private corporations were starting to retreat from positions they took after George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020. We had that brief period of racial reckoning, maybe it was 6 months or so, where we saw a lot of companies step up and say they were going to double down on efforts to diversify their workforces. They were going to commit funding to ensure a diverse workforce. But quickly, after many of those pronouncements were made, we saw companies pulling back from those commitments. And with Trump being in office less than 30 days, we have seen a wholesale attack on efforts at the federal government level and even efforts to influence and to prevent private corporations from meeting any diversity goals that they may have. And Jay, you're absolutely right. DEI is oftentimes associated with African Americans. And people don't realize that diversity, equity, and inclusion goals or metrics or efforts inside corporations or inside the government is not just about Black folks. It's about ensuring a diverse workforce, people that learn differently, people with physical disabilities, people with developmental disabilities, those that are in the LGBTQ community, women, other minorities, Asians, Latinos, other people who have historically been locked out of many positions in private corporations as well as government. And, I've heard a lot of people talk about why is this attack on DEI? And some folks have just concluded it is the way that mediocre, in some instances, white men are fighting back. Jobs that Black folks and brown folks and disabled folks have worked tirelessly for decades to get have proven themselves through educational attainment, through skill development, and now mediocre white boys and men, in some cases, that don't want to see other people in positions of power are striking back. And it's insidious and it's really, really harmful to the civil rights movement. As you know, I'm a civil rights attorney. And when I look at how hard people fought in the 1940s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s to get us to a place where we had anti-discrimination laws written into our federal statutes, and to see the way those statutes are being weaponized against people of color is just shameful and should cause everyone, not just Blacks, but all of those people we just talked about, everyone to use their voices to stand up, to resist, and to fight back.
Yeah, what I find interesting is you had companies, there was no mandate, but you had companies like Target on their own decide, oh, we're going to roll back DEI. Meta, this Meta Facebook, same thing. We're going to roll back DEI. And so I know some, I don't think Target, but some other companies like those did kind of step back and change their mind. They put their DEI policies back up on their website once they heard all the pushback. But it's just interesting that that's happened. We've talked about DEI. What about and speaking of DEI, the Kennedy Center got brought into that. The Kennedy Center, which is our performing arts here in Washington D.C., he got rid of a lot of what he thought were DEI hires for the Kennedy Center, and he's taking over that as well. We had Issa Rae cancel her show due to his decision to fire those individuals. So DEI really does touch upon a lot of things that we all care about. Another issue that a lot of people care about is immigration. Can you explain briefly? You know, I know there's so much when it comes to immigration at this point, but he said that his policy is only affecting violent criminals who are immigrants. But then you see him take in or try to raid schools. Children are
Yeah.
criminals the last time I checked. And then I also see him going after people that are undocumented, which is actually a civil penalty. A lot of people think you are committing a crime if you don't have all your documents. It's actually a civil penalty, and a lot of people don't know that. But some people assume that the undocumented are considered criminals as well and should be kind of looped into this piece of executive order that he's trying to move forward with. So, what are your thoughts on that and just a more clarity on specifically what that is?
Well, let me go back, Jay, briefly to the DEI issue because, again, there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation about DEI. And you've had leaders, corporate leaders like Mark Cuban and others, Jamie Dimon, talk about the economic case for diversity in the workplace. This isn't about Black folks or brown folks or women or gay people. It's about the economics. And there is ample evidence to support the case that workplaces that have more women, that have more people of color, that have diversity make more money, they generate more revenue, and they generate more profit for shareholders. So when we think about what is this attack on DEI about, it is not about making companies more profitable. It is not about ridding the workplace of so-called incompetent individuals, as the Trump administration would like for you to believe. There's no conclusion other than this is sheer, unabashed racism. Because if it was just about dollars and cents, if it was just about the money, just about the economics, all companies and all governmental entities and agencies would be embracing diversity and equity and including all kinds of people, the people that represent this country, into their workforces because we have ample evidence, data, statistics, facts that prove that more diverse workplaces are more profitable, generate more revenue. But as it relates to this immigration policy, categorically, it is not the case that these raids are targeting just hardened criminals. We've seen too many stories, too many examples. I've interviewed families who've talked about knowing people who've gotten caught up in these raids that have not, as you indicated, committed any crimes. The only crime they've committed is maybe they came to this country 30 years ago, and maybe they don't have quote unquote legal documentation, but they are incredibly important to the economy. They contribute, undocumented workers, again, facts, stats, and data. We don't deal a lot with that when we talk about Donald Trump because he doesn't believe in data or facts. But the facts and the data are there to support that undocumented workers contribute billions of dollars to our economy. And many pay into Social Security, even though they'll never be able to reclaim any of those funds they pay into Social Security. Many of them pay both state taxes and federal taxes because they're trying to demonstrate that they are good citizens, that they want to be a part of this country and they're willing to pay their fair share. So unfortunately, undocumented workers get painted with this broad brush as being, hardened criminals, rapists, and murderers. And that could not be further from the truth. Again, facts and data uh, back up the proposition that immigrants in this country, undocumented workers, commit no more crimes than US citizens, those of us who are born here that don't have any immigration status or issues. There's no evidence to suggest that undocumented workers or immigrants are more criminal or commit more crimes than U.S. citizens.
I concur. And like you said, I think it's just it's misinformation and what Congressman Jasmine Crockett says. She says it's a civics problem. That's her favorite phrase for me. She's like, people just don't understand. So she says sometimes I get exhausted arguing with people that just simply don't know how the rules work, how the laws work, what applies to what. You know, if you're arguing with someone that doesn't have that understanding, it is very difficult to get your point across.
And it's going to be even more difficult, Jay, now with the dismantling of the Department of Education. So, at a time when people need
Right,
more education, in Black History Month, when we should be teaching
right,
not just Black history, but American history, because Black history is American history, in this
yes.
moment when kids need more civics, more U.S. history, more Black history, Trump and his administration is making efforts to dismantle those programs and that entire department, which is going to be, again, so detrimental to not just Black kids, not just poor kids, but kids in rural communities, white kids that live in rural communities, kids who have disabilities. You know, again, this myth that somehow only Black kids, only poor kids, only Latino kids have
Mhm.
disabilities. I've been a civil rights lawyer for more than 20 years. I can tell you categorically that's false. That white kids are far more likely, again, in terms of the sheer numbers, uh, to be in special education classes, to access and have the need to access special education services. So all of those kids, Black, brown, disabled, are going to be put at a huge disadvantage with the dismantling of the federal Department of Education. Going back to your Kennedy Center question, though, we
Mhm.
saw mass resignations. Shonda Rhimes announced her resignation from the Kennedy Center board. But again, attacking and targeting the Kennedy Center, some of the reports is because it sponsored one or two drag shows. And again,
Mm,
this attack on the LGBTQ
TQ.
community, unfounded attacks. Um, so we are likely to see no longer the Kennedy Center. Maybe it's going to be, in all likelihood, the Trump Center, and staffed by and have board members that are on the far right, MAGA supporters. Who knows what the entertainment, what the arts will look like once that center is taken over, renamed, and all the program completely changed.
Well, we know that art is a form of expression, and so you know, one of the things they did during the Holocaust, they got rid of the books, they got rid of certain arts, they got rid of the things that would express that political protest. And so I don't think it's a coincidence, in addition to just the hires. I think he's going after creative expression where dissidents could be expressed a certain way. I think he's doing that on purpose. I don't think the Kennedy Center is just like a random place on its list. It's part of that larger goal. If you can explain, since you hit on the next agency that I was going to ask you about, the Department of Education, what exactly does it mean to dismantle? And you can just go in order: the Department of Education and what that means, USAID and what that means, and I think there was a third one, Department of Treasury and what that
Well, basically, Project 2025 told us, Jay, that the far right had a vision for our government that's very different than the government we experience today and that we've experienced in years gone by. In their reshaping of government, the federal government would be basically dismantled, and most of the power would revert back to states. And so, under this model, if you believe this model, you don't need these departments because they wouldn't have very many functions. But the reality is, coming out of the 60s, the civil rights statutes, we saw that we couldn't trust states like Alabama and Mississippi to provide for the protections of people of color. We needed the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. We needed the Department of Education to ensure that the rights of minoritized people were protected, even when states wouldn't do so. So imagine if we dismantle the Department of Education and we dismantle the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, then if you are in a state that has passed laws that basically give a green light to discrimination on the basis of your gender identity or on the basis of your race or your gender or your age, where do you turn? Where do you go? If the government has been dismantled, those agencies that, again, that are designed to provide and to protect you from that kind of state enforced discrimination, uh, there won't be any guardrails, any
Right.
safeguards available. And that was the intentional, very methodical and intentional plan of Project 2025.
Well, I don't understand. So I understand what he's doing with education. Why are you messing with the Department of Treasury? That's the money. That's not like a state by state thing. What is I'm not understanding the Department of Treasury, his goal there, and messing with that agency.
Well, part of the goal is to give the power of the purse, which under our Constitution belongs to Congress, but is usurping the authority of our US Congress and putting it in the hands of the executive branch. And then, like we've seen with Elon Musk and his Doge unit going into these departments and determining who is going to be worthy of receiving government funding, not based on what's been appropriated by Congress, but based on who's a friend and who's a foe. So you have Elon Musk and Donald Trump deciding a state like California that has been, ravished by these brush fires. Well, maybe FEMA's not going to be available to provide assistance for those homeowners that lost their homes, particularly if those homeowners were not Trump supporters. And maybe if California doesn't allow ICE agents into schools and into, places of worship, then maybe they're not going to get that federal funding. So the takeover, the dismantling of the Treasury Department is again to place the power of that department in the hands of the tyrant in chief, which is Donald Trump. And
And then I know
ultimately, I think, Jay, too, there's an effort here to privatize some of these agencies. I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that by dismantling these agencies, by firing thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of government workers, we're going to find that we need some of those departments. We need some of those agencies. And I can imagine that we'll start to see talk and efforts to privatize, and we'll see billionaire partners, billionaire friends of Donald Trump running agencies. They look very much like the same agencies that he's dismantling.
interesting about the privatization of that. And even as it relates to money, the US aid, he said that we were giving money to, again, he went after things like, oh, we gave money to trans shows and surgeries, trans surgeries. Again, I haven't seen the documentation, so I can't speak on it, but it just seems like they picked the things they felt like US aid was allegedly spending money on, highlighted the things that were the most, I don't know, I feel like controversial to justify, like, hey, this agency is spending taxpayer dollars on things they shouldn't be. We're going to shut it down. And I know I think there's a temporary hold on the USA decision. I don't know where they are as it relates to Department of Education and Treasury. I don't know. Has a court temporary put a hold on those decisions as well, or are those also going forward?
Yeah, I haven't seen decisions on those cases. What we do know, Jay, is that agencies, civil rights organizations, uh, legal leaning, or I should say liberal leaning organizations are filing lawsuits daily. There's a rapid response, an effort by people that believe in our democracy, that believe in our three co-equal branches of government to ensure that all of the power of the government is not usurped by this one man invested in the executive branch. Because the dollars that have been frozen, whether it's aid to foreign countries or whether it's grants to research institutions, those dollars were appropriated by Congress. Under the articles of our Constitution, they give them the power to do so. And under the traditional rule of law, the rule of law that existed before Donald Trump, became 47th president of the United States, it was only Congress that had the power to make decisions to alter, to change, to eliminate that funding. And it's just remarkable to me to see Republican congressmen, Republican senators not standing up and asserting the authority that they have under the Constitution and capitulating and giving over their constitutional power to this one man. Now, can you imagine if Kamala Harris had won the election? She's sitting in the White House and she starts firing off executive orders one at a time, 200, 300 plus, that gave her that level of power. Can you imagine the kind of resistance, the kind of outcry, the outrage we would have seen on the right? But what we're seeing opposite of that, you have these Republican pundits, these Republican lawmakers saying, well, maybe this is what we needed. Government wasn't working after all. So, yes, it's a little unconventional, it's out the box, but this is what we needed. And it's going to hurt a little while right now. But when he gets through taking this knife to our US government, everybody's going to feel better. America's going to be great again. And they're selling this as if this is someone who's just taken over a private company. And he is treating it like it's a private company takeover where you go in and you fire all the staff and you come in with a new vision. Well, one problem with that is this isn't his private company. This is our country, and we have laws, and he's not above the law, and
Mm.
he's not allowed to usurp this level of power, which is why I'm so happy to see the level of resistance that we're seeing both in the courtroom and on streets across this nation.
I love what you said just now, that he is treating it like a corporation. Everybody knows Donald Trump from The Apprentice. So he's always been known as a businessman. He's always been known as an entertainer, which, quite frankly, he should have
More
just stayed at.
entertainment than businessman.
Well, own businesses, right? And tried to have a show where he would hire and fire business owners, right? He is treating it, you're right. He's treating it like his show. He's treating it like a company he would run. And unfortunately, to your point, this isn't your private company. You can't treat the United States of America that way. That was beautifully put. I think it hits it right on the head. And that touches on our last hot topic when it comes to Donald Trump, federal workers. So I'm originally from DC. And so I have friends and family that work in the federal government. If they are a remote worker, unless they are emergency or essential, and they were working remote, they have to go back in the office. Otherwise, they have to essentially resign or they're going to fire them. The problem is we don't have the infrastructure to hold all these people now. So you're going to have all these people on the road trying to go back to work. There's no place for them. And if they take the money and they resign, there's no guarantee that they can get another government job. So it's quite a pickle he's put people in, but obviously he's purposely doing this. Again, I think it's a way to also kind of get rid of some of the old, like you said, and bring in the new. I do believe I saw that they lifted the freeze on that decision, so it appears that it's moving forward, that federal remote workers, again, unless you're like essential, um you will have to go back in, or you face the potential of being fired.
Jay, it's not even guaranteed that your so-called 8 months of severance is going to be paid to you. So I think people should be rightfully skeptical about any promises made by this administration, because what we do know is that he's created so much chaos. He's given access to our most sensitive and private records to a part-time employee by the name of Elon Musk that has brought in a team of, young uninitiated individuals, again, like his private company, and have given them unfettered access to our records. So there is another problem here, a legal issue. Many of these employees, their employment is governed by union contracts. Many of these employees are civil service employees and they have due process rights. They can't just be summarily dismissed. They're not at will employees. They're not your at will employees at your private corporation. So many of them have rights and their processes, due process rights that must be followed even before you can terminate them. And it's remarkable, again, how all of those rights are being completely trampled on and ignored. But again, you're seeing labor unions, you're seeing workers' rights groups file lawsuits. And something else we should mention, Jay, that you saw yesterday, a couple of days ago, the Department of Justice, that again works for the people. They are not the lawyers for Donald Trump, directing the acting U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York to drop charges against New York Mayor Eric Adams. Now, this is after Eric Adams has gone to Mar-a-Lago, after Eric Adams has made it clear that he's willing to bargain away whatever rights New Yorkers have in exchange for his own personal freedom. And a Republican appointed interim U.S. attorney said, I refuse. on ethical and legal grounds to do this. She gave the history of Eric Adams, allegations, nothing proven yet in court, but she said his corruption, the evidence, according to this U.S. attorney, of corruption is so pervasive and so robust that it would be unethical for me to go before a court and to dismiss the charges against him. And we saw three members of that Southern District U.S. Attorney's Office resign. And there's a scathing letter from someone from, big justice to the acting U.S. attorney, basically telling her she's derelict in her duties because she will not, what he calls, dismiss a politically charged indictment. And so we have the Department of Justice interfering in the prosecution of individuals for political reasons. We've never seen that in the recent history of our Department of Justice. And that scares me as a lawyer because
Mm-hmm.
that says big justice can decide if you don't play ball,
Mm-hmm.
if you don't let ICE agents into your schools, into
Mm-hmm.
your buildings,
Mm-hmm.
not only might we withhold federal funding, but we might manufacture
Mm-hmm.
an indictment, a
Yeah.
criminal indictment against you to
Yeah.
use as a bargaining chip
Yeah.
to get what this administration wants.
Yes, it's really scary, like you said, even all the way down to the Department of Justice of how Trump's, efforts and vision and decision to again just rule this like a dictator. But to be fair, they say believe someone when they show you the first time. He did actually say when he was running that he was going to run it like a dictatorship. He actually said when he was running, "Oh, don't worry, you'll never have to vote again after if you let me in." I mean, not to point out the obvious, but he did say a lot of this. And I don't know if some people just thought it was entertainment and him just over exaggerating, but a lot of this was said. With that said, just jumping into some individual questions about you and just how this is all playing out. Um, what is your advice? Because at this point, we've kind of done. Thank you for doing our Trump hot topics. We've run down this whole list of things of how he's just trying to destroy the United States of America. Um, what is your advice to people in terms of how do we keep pushing forward? How do we move forward? Because I mean, we're not even 30 days in, Miss Martin. So we have to go 4 years and just pray that there's some America left to rehabilitate after all this is done and get somebody obviously else in his seat. But until then, what is your recommendation? Because sometimes I feel so overwhelmed that I tell my family I'm only going to check in maybe every couple of days on updates. Because if I look at it every day, I become overwhelmed. I become
Yeah.
depressed. I become tired. So what is your recommendation in terms of being informed, but maybe not absorbed by this or consumed by this?
No, Jay, that's a good point. And again, a part of the strategy is to do that, is to make us feel overwhelmed, is to have the chaos be at such an intense level that people don't know quite how to respond. And there are many of us who believe that the Democrats, the big party Democrats, were caught off guard, even though, as you just said, Trump told us what he was going to do. Then they gave us a playbook called Project 2025, a 1,000-page document that laid it out in writing. So to the extent you didn't believe it as he articulated it, you had the playbook, but yet still many people ignored it. What I tell people is, look, I know everyone's fatigued. Everyone is, election fatigue set in. Black women in particular, lots of memes, lots of pronouncements on social media that we were done, that we had given 110% to this election, we were taking a rest. Don't look for us to save America. Well, I'm sorry, Black women. I hope everyone got some rest, but we have to save America because it's not just America. We're saving our communities. We're saving the future for our children and for our children's children. And there are only so many people I think that have the moxie, that have the organizing ability, that have the intellectual ability, and that has the vested interest to do this work. And lots of folks can do it, and amongst those, lots of people are going to be Black women. So I would just encourage folks, find your tribe, find your support group, find those people where you feel safe, where you can take respites, where you can, disconnect when you need to, like you said, put yourself on a media diet, but in the same time, don't sleep on this moment because this moment, as you said, could redefine our entire country. And our ancestors fought too hard to get us to this point for us to throw up our hands and say we're tired. So when I feel weary like that, and we all will, it's human nature. I think about what their struggle was like. This is Black History Month, so we're celebrating and we're acknowledging the pioneers, from the enslaved men and women that built this country who never got a penny of compensation. I'm working on a case in St. Louis involving St. Louis University and the enslaved people that were brought from Maryland to St. Louis to build that university. We did a study last year with an economist, 74 billion plus dollars of uncompensated wages. So, as challenging and as difficult as this feels for us in this moment, remember that our ancestors had to endure something even much, much more atrocious and violent and horrifying than what we are experiencing today. And I hope that gives everybody motivation to do what they can from where you are. Some people have, a huge platform and a big microphone and a big bully pulpit and use it. I commend those folks who you can go on social media and they are educating and they're giving those civics lessons that you're talking about and they're pushing back. I commend those legal organizations that are in those courts filing those lawsuits. We have to keep filing them because if we don't, we might as well just say, hands up, you win. And we can't do that because there's too much at stake. So find your local organization. We marched for Black men and women who were being killed by police, righteous, righteous causes. This is as important as those causes. So when we took to the streets with Black Lives Matter and other groups marching, immigrants that have been marching, people who have been marching against Donald Trump, find those groups in your community and join them. So I think there's a role that all of us can play, just depending on what your platform is, the time that you have. But I can't think of anything more important in this moment than us using our voices to resist Trumpism and the tyranny that he is unleashing on this country. And Jay, it's not just 4 years. We better be very clear-eyed about the fact that the plan is 12, four
Mm,
with Donald Trump and 8 with JD Vance.
it's a good
So
point. It's a good point.
we cannot assume our rest because he'll be gone, right?
Right.
Because one, there are conversations happening in Republican circles about extending, changing, modifying the Constitution.
Presidential term.
I've been
Yes.
hearing an
Heard that.
argument
Hmm.
made by the far right that
Hmm.
the 2 terms have to be consecutive,
Mm.
and that because this would not be a consecutive second term, he gets a second consecutive term.
Wow.
Sounds like a fringe concept, right?
Oh
But
my
so
gosh.
did pardoning all of the insurrectionists. We said, "Oh, no way can he do that, right? How could he disrespect those police officers? How could he do that? Some of those people we watched, with bats and all kinds of, poles, he did it.
Did it.
So we should not assume that this is about 4 years. It's much,
Wow.
much deeper than that.
You made a good point. And even if Donald Trump, I mean, it's so much bigger than Trump at this point because there's so many people behind him, whether it be J.D. Vance or the other people that essentially paid to play to put him in that position. So you're right. It's bigger than Donald Trump. And so we just have to be prepared, make sure we have our next candidate for president up and working right now. We need to be talking about who do we put up against? What judges do we encourage to make sure that they don't change the terms of the presidency, that they don't change the Constitution. So, like there's a lot of work to be done, and I think we're the 92%. They said the 92% was resting, but again, take your rest, but by no means sit out the next 4 plus years because it could truly be detrimental to everything, quite frankly. Which is a great segue for my next question for you. When you go to law school, you can be a lot of things. And obviously, you are a legal correspondent now, and your career has gone beyond you just being an attorney. But why civil rights? I mean, that's a tough area to go into. Was there something specific that happened in your life where you said, okay, I'm in, was it before law school? Was it during law school where you said, okay, this is the path I'm going to go down?
Yeah, I didn't grow up in a family with lawyers and have a lot of lawyers as role models, but I always was keenly interested in my environment, my surroundings, and I saw a lot of inequities. I couldn't put a word on it, I couldn't name it at the time, but there was always a nagging question for me about how some people had so much and others had so little. Why some people were treated with such great privilege and others with such great disdain. So for me, getting to law school and seeing how the courts have been used by icons like Thurgood Marshall, like Constance Baker Motley, like Pauli Murray, and others, seeing how the law was used to create, at least try to create a level playing field, whether it was Brown v. Board of Education or some of the other seminal civil rights cases, it became clear to me that civil rights law was a mechanism through which you could change society, which you could create an equal playing field, that you could provide more opportunities for individuals who have been locked out of the American dream. So it was what I observed as a child growing up in a housing project in St. Louis, and then learning about civil rights icons and how they use the law to create pathways for equity and equality that led me to the practice.
Amazing. Um, and with you practicing, again, you're a lawyer, you're a commentator, you're also an advocate of a lot of causes. Um, I know you've been an advocate of reparations. I know California is one of the first states. I don't think it obviously pushed through. But what is your understanding of if reparations were to roll out? How that would look, how would it work? Would it have to be something federal where everybody would follow the same rule, or would it be state by state? How would that look? I know it was starting in California, and I think New York was taking a look at a stab
Yes.
at it. But just briefly, your
Yeah,
understanding of why reparations should move forward in this country and how it could potentially be rolled out.
yeah, definitely there's an effort, and Congresswoman Presley out of Massachusetts has picked up the mantle from Sheila Jackson Lee, who picked up the mantle from John Conyers to try to push forth a bill at the federal level around reparations. But what I know to be true is that reparations is and can be a very localized issue at the state level, at the municipal level, and even down to the school board level. There are efforts, like in Berkeley, California, for example, where their school board passed a resolution to make reparations available to students in its school who have been deprived of educational opportunities, Black students that have been deprived of educational opportunities. So reparations can happen. We've seen private institutions, we've seen uh, religious organizations like the Jesuits decide that they wanted to learn more about their involvement with enslaved people and they wanted to atone for their involvement with slavery. Harvard University, to my dismay, dismantled or at least outsourced, they said, their team of employees who were working on their slavery and remembrance project. So, no, reparations can take place in many shapes and forms. It's just the will and the desire to do so. We've seen around the world some governmental entities step up, some private companies step up and say, we want to learn more about our involvement with slavery, and then we want to atone for it.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I know you do a lot of you're a commentator for CNN. And one of the things when I interviewed Sunny, it was something Sunny Hostin, she mentioned to me, and she said, I don't think I would be actually as good of a commentator or journalist if I hadn't been an attorney first. Do you concur with that?
Well, definitely a lot of the commentating that I do, whether it's CNN or ABC or any other network, is legal. So obviously being a lawyer helps because
Mm,
one, you wouldn't have the credibility, I think, to even comment on some of these legal cases or to understand the perplexities or complexities, I mean, of some of the cases, whether it's understanding the trial involving, ASAP Rocky, or looking at the charges against sexual predators like those real estate brothers out of New York. So definitely the legal background, I think, plays a huge role. And even when I do more political commentary, I did election night commentary. It was me and a Republican commentator. So again, having a understanding of the law, being trained as a lawyer, I definitely think helps, but I don't think it's uh, exclusively the way someone can become a very skilled and very successful commentator. There are many folks that I work with that have not gone to law school who are brilliant and who have had a very successful career, who have successful careers as pundits or
what is
on air
some
pundits, I should
mhm.
say.
What is something you wish you had known before that you know now that you wish you had known before you became a legal commentator?
I think learning, it's kind of two different worlds because as lawyers, as a trial lawyer, which is what I was, you write briefs, and typically your problem is you don't have enough pages. You're requesting additional pages from the court because you've got so much to say, and you're taught as a lawyer to expound and to elaborate and to give, elaborate examples and to compare cases to precedents and to lay out elaborate fact patterns. As a commentator, you've got some cases 30 seconds, sometimes
Mhm.
2 minutes, sometimes 3 minutes. So you've got to have the ability to synthesize a lot of information and put it in a sound bite. And again, as lawyers, we learn a lot of legalese. It's how many big words can you use, right? How many Latin terms can you use? You get a lot of credit for that. When you're talking on television or on a radio show or a podcast or on the internet, people don't have time to go to the dictionary and look up what you're saying. So you got to make it plain. You got to make it plain. They tell you literally make it understandable for a fifth grader. So they're two different skill sets. And you'll see some folks on television, I've seen this, professors and other really brilliant minds, but they struggle because they have not learned the art of the
Mhm.
soundbite.
Mhm.
I understand why, because that's not what's taught in law school.
Absolutely, absolutely. Last but not least, we know you're an author. You've written a lot of books. Is there another book that you're writing? Is there any other projects our audience should know that's coming up for you?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of projects. One related to the work I do around reparations. There was tremendous interest, as you stated, state of California, state of New York, probably 32 cities around the country that have either initiated a reparations commission or are in some way looking at how they atone for their involvement with slavery. So I'm looking at some media projects, some literary projects around the work I do with reparations.
And I know you're also a autism advocate. Is there anything you're doing in that space? We think that's such a wonderful space to be in.
Yeah, we're always looking for ways to elevate the issues and the cause of autism and other developmental disabilities. My nonprofit that I run in Los Angeles, Special Needs Network, we've been expanding to provide more services throughout the state of California. We have a major job force development program where we're trying to train more individuals to go into the field of autism services and autism intervention. So I'm really that work is, my passion work, my passion project. I get to work with so many brilliant families and dedicated parents who understand that when kids with autism or any disability are given the resources they need, that they have tremendous potential.
Well, we always end our episode with the Black Excellence Moment of the Week. Something that, if you're listening, you may not know about Miss Martin. Um, almost her whole family is a family full of lawyers, her immediate family. She's had two daughters graduate, and remind me their names, Morgan
Michael.
and Michael. So they are our Black Excellence Moment of the Week. We think that's so cool that they went to this Ivy League school and graduated and passed the bar and were recently sworn in. Tell us a little bit more about your girls since they are our Black Excellence Moment of the Week.
Oh, well, thank you so much for highlighting their accomplishments. Yes, Michael and Morgan made history at Columbia University as the only duo, the only sister team, siblings that were pursuing a JD MBA and attending Columbia at the same time. So Michael did a 3-year JD MBA program. She has since graduated. She took the California State Bar. She passed on the first time. Yay, Michael. She was sworn in December, and now she's working in the firm. She is pursuing her own career in civil rights. She's was thrown into the fire. She's been talking to clients. She's been vetting cases. She's been sitting in on mediations and learning the practice of law, becoming a very skilled civil rights litigator and trial attorney. Morgan is in a 4-year program, so she's in her last year at Columbia, and she's actually now studying for the New York bar. She's in a special program the Columbia offers. She'll be able to sit for the New York bar at the end of February. Then she'll return to Los Angeles in the summer and sit again in July for the California bar. So if all goes well, fingers crossed, she'll be barred in New York and California, taking two of the hardest bars in the country, and then she will start her full-time employment in the fall of this year. So I'm really proud of them. As a lawyer, how difficult it is. There are, many challenges that lawyers, particularly lawyers of color, particularly female lawyers of color, face. Only about 4% of the whole profession is, made up of, Black lawyers. And Harvard Law, which has traditionally had about 10% of its incoming class, one of the biggest classes of all law schools, this year, sadly, will only open its doors to 19 Black law students. That
Mm,
is shameful. That number is dramatically less than when I went to Harvard. I was on the campus a couple of weeks ago. There is just utter, disappointment. And a lot of it has to do with the dismantling of affirmative action by the Supreme Court in college admissions. And
mhm,
although, schools said that they didn't think it would impact their numbers, we've seen schools around the country have fewer Black students in particular get admitted. And so for the first time ever, Harvard is only going, I shouldn't say ever, I'm sure in the early days, but in more recent times, only have 19 Black students. And that's really unfortunate for the institution. And it just again goes back to why, as Black women, as lawyers, as activists, we have to continue fighting. I mean, people died literally.
mhm.
Pauli Murray was denied access to Harvard Law School. She ended up going to Howard, and she went on a letter writing campaign to shame the university for denying her admission simply because she was Black. And it is the efforts of folks like that that opened these schools up to students of color, Black students. And we can't afford to regress. We can't afford to go back to a time where you're the only one, or you're one of very few sitting in classrooms, sitting in law firms, sitting in courtrooms. So we have to keep fighting. And each generation has a responsibility to continue the fight for justice.
Well, on that note, I'm just so happy that your daughters are an example of that next group. I always tell people, folks like yourself and me that have media platforms, it's important that we stay in front of the camera so that your daughters and the group coming after your daughters, they know that it's still cool to be a lawyer. It's still cool to be a doctor. Everyone doesn't have to be, an actress, singer, content creator. Not that those aren't great jobs, but we still need Black lawyers. We still need Black female
Oh my
lawyers. And
God,
so
yes,
we're just so
yes.
happy that your daughters are a shining example of that. And I know there are going to be role models to some students to come. And again, congratulations to them. And on that note, thank you for joining the Black Lawyers Podcast. You can find us on all our social media handles at the Black Lawyers Podcast, online at theblacklawyers.com. And you are online at Ariva Martin. Is it just Ariva
Yes,
Martin?
all social media platforms at Ariva Martin, and my website is arivamartin.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. Take care, everyone.